What's up, gangsters? It's time for a testing and comparison video. Unfortunately for you guys, because that means it's going to be like an hour long. And in fact, this one is, I think. I'm making this intro after the fact because, once again, I found a booger in my nose when I went to edit the original intro. So there you go. You'd think I'd learned my lesson, right? But clearly I don't. Comes with having a hairy ass nose, I guess. Anyway, point being is I have been wanting to do this video for a while. And it's about decal setting solutions, by the way. Yes, there is an actual topic. But it took me some time to gather up all the materials, which I have here on my bench. I don't use a ton of decals. I don't, if I can help it. But I'm just always curious because people talk about these things, and I feel like it's, good to know and good to be able to offer some insight if I can. So I am going to compare a bunch of decal setting solutions. Well, I actually already did, but you know what I'm saying. So anyway, let's just get on with it. See what this is all about. Okay, so like I said, I don't use decals any more than I have to. And it's not because I can't or because they scare me. I really don't have much trouble to speak of with decals. But the truth is that they just don't provide the level of realism that I'm after in most cases. Now, that really is specific to military type models where you're dealing with relatively simple markings. And so in that case, I just feel like that painting them is always going to be the best solution. Here's kind of an example, if I can get the camera over here. I've been working on this Stompy robot thing for a while, and you will see that it's got got both painted markings and a decal on it. Now, all these markings here on top are painted on, and I think that they kind of illustrate why I prefer that for realism, because they're paint, and I can do all of the things to them that you can do to any other kind of paint. Now, decals, as far as anybody knows, are also just layers of paint, probably some kind of lacquer, and you can do things to them as well. But it's just still no substitute for actual paint. The problem is that there are always going to be situations where you just don't have much choice. These things were relatively easy to mask and spray, but there are times when that's just not going to be the case. Really, really small stencils, for example, where masks just can't be effectively cut. I mean, even the letters on that 6AF thing right there, I had to have done for a different model as photo etch masks because the AF is just too small for your typical vinyl or washi masking tape type masking material. And a lot of cutters just can't, most cutters that I know of just can't cut masks that small. You also have situations where you've got things that are just too complex because they are multicolored or whatever, like this thing right here. If I can, I'll reorient the camera so you can see it a little bit better, but that insignia right there on that little door, which, as an aside, I just really irritatingly found out is actually the insignia for Jagged Gash Invader, for however you say it, 54, which apparently it was a German fighter squadron in World War II. And I don't have anything against German fighter squadrons per se, but I do have something against derivative and unoriginal art. And I took this decal off of the sheet for this Stompy robot, thinking that it had been created specifically for said Stompy robot, only to find out that it's not. And this robot is not supposed to have any sort of affiliation with any organizations of the present or past. So that's kind of irritating. But hopefully what you can see is that this decal is, I mean, that's a situation where there's just no choice but to use the decal. I mean, you're just really not probably going to be able to mask and paint something like that. And you can see that I have done some things to it like I would with any other kind of paint. After I applied it using my standard solve a set, micro sol, whichever one I feel like I need depending on how strong of a solution is required. I sanded it just like some paint, and then I applied it directly on the paint as I typically do with decals. And then once I had it the way I wanted it, I clear coated it with Tester's Dull Coat, which is a lacquer and is pretty much my go-to unglosser. So anyway, look, sometimes you got to use decals, and you can certainly make them look painted on. I think that one right there is about as close to looking painted on as you're going to get. And obviously, if you do, anything automotive, race cars, motorcycles, that sort of thing, you also aren't going to have any choice but to use decals. So there's plenty of times where you need to be able to do it, and you need to be able to do it well. And part of that is finding a good decal setting solution. And it seems like there are more of them than ever on the market now. And so, like I said, because I'm just curious, I wanted to check them all out. So what I've got here is Solve a Set, which this stuff has been around forever. I remember using Solve a Set when I was a kid back in the late 80s. And it works just as good now as it did then. I don't know that they've ever changed the formula. As it says here on the front, contains methoxy-2-propanol, methoxy-1-propanol. So it's alcohols of some type. And I consider it to be the hammer. I have never met a decal that would not, I take that back. That's not true. I was about to say I'd never met a decal that wouldn't submit to at least multiple applications of Solve a Set, but that's not true. I did a video actually last year about applying decals, and I used some Academy decals that absolutely laughed at Solve a Set. Didn't even touch them. They were terrible. Literally the worst decals I've ever seen. When I don't need something quite as strong, then there's the good old Microsol, which has also been around for like 40 years. It's also a mild alcohol solution as far as anybody knows. And it's pretty dependable. So what I will typically do, if I'm not sure how hard the decal is going to be to get set, then I will start with this. If it doesn't work, then I'll go to the stronger stuff. Now, this is a good point to talk a little bit about the naming convention here, because I think these guys at Microscale kind of set us up for confusion a long time ago. I call all of these decal setting solutions, and I think that's probably pretty common. Setting meaning that it melts it into the surface of whatever it is you're working on, right? That's how I think of it. It sets it firmly in place. But Microscale also has this stuff in the blue bottle called Microset. So what the hell is that? Well, they say right here that it's a setting solution for decals. Softens decals and improves adhesion, decal remover. Well, that's all pretty much bullshit. This stuff is basically, as far as anybody knows, vinegar and water. Or, some formula of acetic acid. And in fact, there's the age-old trick for doing the same thing is to just use vinegar and water. I apply all of my decals in the same way using a jar of decal water It used to say decal water on the side of it at one time, and it's always at room temperature, whatever that is. But the important point is that it's just tap water mixed with a 10 or 20% microset. Because what microset seems to do is, more than anything, just reduce the surface tension. Makes it easier to slide the decals around, in other words. It may soften the adhesive. I don't really know. Again, as far as anybody knows, decal adhesive is basically cornstarch, and it gets pretty soft in water. So I honestly have never been convinced that this stuff does anything important, but, you know, like everybody else, I continue to use it. The point being is that they call it a setting solution, and it's not, because as far as I can tell, it doesn't do anything to actually melt or conform the decal onto the surface. That is reserved for Sol, which also apparently is a setting solution for decals. So yeah, I don't know, but maybe we should be talking about decal positioners and decal solvents, or decal, I don't know. Anyway, point being is that's the naming convention I'm going to use. A setting solution is the thing that melts it in place. So if you're thinking about using this microscale product, it's always blue before red. This is the stuff that helps you position it. This is the stuff that sets it. Okay? So now we get to this new stuff from AK, decal adapter. They've just said, screw all the silly names, we're going to make up our own. And so we have decal adapter solution. Now this is a liquid to adapt your decals to any surface and blend it perfectly with the model. Yeah, so, you know, whatever any of that means. I don't know what this stuff is made of. I assume it's another kind of alcohol. Haven't opened the bottle yet. We'll get to that. Now we have more confusion from the Japanese. These are Guns products. Under the Mr. Hobby umbrella. Mr. Mark Softer, Mr. Mark Setter. And they look radically different. Nothing on here is in English, so I can't even begin to say exactly how they're supposed to be used. But in the process of doing this little test, that's all going to be figured out. So we've got that. Then we've got Tamiya Mark Fit decal solution and Mark Fit Strong. And my impression of these is that these are both what I call setting solutions. Just that one is I don't know. People say this stuff is basically useless. I don't know. It may not be strong enough to really do anything. It basically, this one says, apply it to the area where the decal is to be applied. In other words, before you put the decal down. And to me, that's more like, you know, microset. Because like this stuff, Solvaset, you don't ever want to put it there before you put the decal in place, because that is just asking for disaster. Because with a lot of decals, something that's this strong will soften them immediately to the point that if you try and move them around, you'll just ruin them. And that's kind of the general rule with setting solutions, is once you've applied them, just walk away. Don't freak out when the decals start to get wrinkled up. Don't touch them. Don't try to move them. You're done at that point until the thing is dry. So when I read the instructions of this thing, that sounds, yeah, more like, I don't know, like micro set. Let's look at what let's see what Mark Fit Strong says. It says the same thing. So again, very confusing. And I don't know if I'm going to follow the instructions when I do the test. I mean, I guess I should, but I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, lots of confusion. how am I going to do the test? Well, yeah, like I said, it's going to be rigorously unscientific. What I have done here is I've got some test pieces that I've prepared almost identically, but with some differences that allow me to also sort of check out a couple of other things. This is painted. The light green is the new AK Real color, which is, oh boy, somebody's trying to call me, of course, and what do you bet it's junk. Anyway, okay, yeah, hold on a second here. This has to go away. Okay, so anyway, AK Real Colors is new stuff from AK. It's basically a hybrid acrylic, a lot like Tamiya. You can thin it with their thinner, with IPA, or with lacquer thinners. And that's what I did. I sprayed it on here, thinned 50-50 with Mr. Leveling Thinner. And the other paint is MRP, which is just sprayed on straight. It's all applied over a base of Mr. Surfacer 1500. So, a pretty normal, pretty standard application of paint. And it's basically 2 layers thick. I wanted to get full opaque coverage, and the objective here is to see if there's any difference in the way that these decal setting solutions affect either of these 2 types of paint. I chose the AK Real Color because some people are saying that it's very susceptible to being damaged by a decal setting solution. And then I wanted the MRP because it's what I use on a day-to-day basis. And I also decided I needed a little bit darker color so that if there is any silvering going on with this, that it'll be easier to see. And so this is the test piece where it's going to get the decals will get applied directly to the paint. These two have been clear coated because I think anybody who's watched any of my nonsense knows my position on clear coating or gloss coating before a decal. In short, it's a waste of time. You don't need to do it. But a lot of people do. And one reason that some people do that does sort of make some sense is if you need a barrier coat because you're afraid that your setting solution is going to damage the paint. In that case, having something like a lacquer or acrylic clear gloss makes a certain amount of sense. I haven't had that issue, so I don't use a barrier coat for that reason. But it does make a certain amount of sense. The idea that decals apply better with a gloss clear, that's my position on that is that that's just silliness that can easily be disproven. Anyhow, one of these is coated with 2 layers of aqua gloss because that's my standard acrylic utility gloss. And it's bulletproof. I haven't ever had any issues with it basically reacting to pretty much anything. But some people have said that it can get softened by decal setting solutions. The other piece, whichever one of them it is, I'm not going to reveal that until later, is painted or cleared with 2 layers of Future. Yeah, I do actually have some on hand because it is occasionally useful. I think Future is terrible as a utility gloss, even if you feel like you need it, especially as a barrier coat, because it's just not as strong of a coating as something like Aqua Gloss. Aqua Gloss is rock hard. It's a polyurethane clear that's designed, it's, as far as I know, it's just basically the same stuff you get for your boat deck. And if that's the case, then it's designed to be pretty durable. Future, on the other hand, is for your floor. It's designed to be walked on and then stripped off when it doesn't look good. And people have proven over and over again that the stuff is very temperamental and can be affected by all kinds of things that get put on top of it, like decal setting solutions. So I was just curious. I thought, why not? Let's see if that happens with any of these. So those are the test pieces. Now, to test decals. What am I going to use? Well, I've debated about that a little bit. A lot of people like to whine and cry about Tamiya decals being terrible. Well, yeah, their military decals can be pretty difficult. They can be pretty thick and can be tough to apply. But they're certainly not the worst. I've definitely experienced decals that were much worse than anything from Tamiya. And not all Tamiya decals are equal. A lot of their automotive decals for their race car kits, their motorcycle kits, those actually come from Cartograph, and they're nice and thin and go down pretty easily. So you can't really say that as a generality that all Tamiya decals are terrible, because they're not all the same. But I think what I'm going to do is I've got 6 different setting solutions, 3 different test pieces. So I think I'm going to carve 18 test samples off of this decal sheet so that they all come from the same place. I've also got this Hasegawa decal sheet that I could use, but I think I'm not. I think I'm going to stick with the Tamiya one. After I've done the basic thing, I may come back and try some other decals, because I should have plenty of room for that. But the basic test is going to be with these Tamiya decals. So anyway, that hopefully is going to be the longest part of the video, because I am not going to make any of you people suffer through watching me apply the decals. That would just be dumb. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply them and let them sit, do their thing, and see what the results are, and then come back and talk about it. See what happens. And it may be nothing happens. These may all be awesome. There may be no differences in any of them. I mean, I already know there's differences between these two over here, but I don't know about any of these others. I've never used them. So this may be very anticlimactic. I don't know. We'll find out. Okay, so I was not going to make any commentary while I was applying the decals, but now that I'm doing it, I'm seeing a couple of things that I thought were interesting and worth showing. Here's one. This is obviously one of the ones that's gloss coated. Now I've only applied 3 of them, and I spread them out so that I wouldn't get any cross-contamination between the setting solutions. But this is the Tamiya Mark Fit Strong. And it's been on there for, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. So you can kind of see how that looks. Then you've got Solvaset, and you can kind of see what's going on there. That also shows what happens when you touch the thing while it's doing its work. Because my normal method is that I'll put a nice layer of setter on there, and if I don't think I've got good enough coverage, or I see that surface tension is making it not cover completely, then I'll just come right back and immediately put another layer on there. And I was doing that, and I touched that 7 right there, and it was already soft enough to get screwy. So you can see that. Then this one here is just plain old microsol. Okay, so in the same order, you've got the other clear coat material, and you can see that looks a little weird, kind of puffy looking underneath there. The clear coat there is definitely reacting differently to the setting solution. Not so much with the Solvaset. Definitely you see it there with the microsol. Now whether or not that settles down as they dry remains to be seen. Now these are the ones that are directly on the paint. And you can see there, that's Mark Fit Strong. It's settling down into the panel line, no problem. Solvaset doing its thing. And you can see the one with microsol. If I could get the angle right, you'd see that it is settling down into all those little grooves right there. So anyway, I'll let those sit there and do their thing, and come back later and do the rest of them. Okay, so here we go. It is the next day, and I've applied all of the settings, all the decals with all the setting solutions, and I've seen some interesting results. I did the first half of them yesterday during the day. I did the second half of them last night. So the ones that are here in the middle have had a little bit more than 12 hours to do their thing. And the first thing I noticed is, look at this. This large number 6 is the AK, and there's still a little puddle of it sitting right there. So even sitting here overnight at room temperature on this piece, which is paint only, it didn't even, the setting solution didn't even evaporate. And I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not, but I noticed that when I was applying it, that it had a lot of surface tension, and it was very difficult to just get a uniform sort of film of the setting solution to rest on top of the decal. In fact, it kind of actually wanted to go underneath the decal and lift it up. And in the amount of time that I would have expected a setting solution to start wrinkling the decal up, it didn't do it at all. It just sort of laid there on it. And you can see, sorry I keep bumping the camera, but you can see that decal, I mean, that looks like ass. That's terrible. It's not melted down into the panel lines hardly at all. It's, you know, it's got some, I guess actually there's some junk in the paint that's trapped under it that's making those bumps. But if you go over here, let's look at the one that's on this other sample that's been clear coated. You can really see it. It not only is it not laying down in the panel lines, but it's still kind of just bubbled up there. I mean, that's just not a good result at all. And then the third sample, also clear coated. Again, I keep bumping the camera. Sorry, guys. You can see some of that one is still bubbled up and not doing good at all. So I'm honestly, I'm surprised, because at the point that right up to the point where I used the AK setting solution, I was thinking that all of these were really going to be about the same. Okay, I didn't really mean to get right into discussing just that one result yet, but it kind of made sense to. So let me rewind for a second, just to reiterate how I applied these decals. I used my room temperature decal water with the, like I said, 10 or 20% microset in it. I soaked the decals for just long enough to get them to release from the backing paper. I put them on. I use a damp Q-tip to massage any air out from under them that may be there. And then I apply the setting solution right away. I know some guys are like waiting until the decal's dry to apply the setting solutions. I don't know that it necessarily makes a difference, but I just don't see a reason to do that. I want to go ahead and get to it right away. And then once I do that, I try not to touch them again. So now let's go through each of the results. I've already covered the AK result, which not so good. And some of these results are pretty subtle, where you really have to be zoomed in and looking closely to see the differences. Also, I guess this is the point where I should reveal what these clear coats are, because this is kind of interesting. This one is the one that's got Future on it. This one is the one that's got Aqua Gloss on it. So as I go through the results, you'll be able to see a little bit of some of the differences. Okay, so in taking a look at this first sample, that is the Tamiya Mark Fit Strong. I mean, that looks great. You know, there's a slight bit of I don't know, effect to the paint where it makes it like look a little shinier or something. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell what's paint and what's I don't know. Anyway, I'm stumbling all over my words right now. But I think the bottom line is that one looks about as good as you could ever expect. And again, direct to the paint, no issues there. Okay, the next one that's done with the Mark Fit Strong is on the Future sample, and it looks great. Looks pretty much perfect. Again, as good as you could expect. You can obviously see the difference between the sheen of the decal film and the sheen of the surrounding area, which is to be expected. They've got two completely different finishes. And, you know, with all of this stuff, these little differences in sheen or slight effect to the paint or whatever, that should go away with whatever your next clear coat is. And you can see the same thing here on the Aqua Gloss. Looks just basically identical to the one that's got Future on it. And what I would be doing next, if this were the real thing, is I'm not gonna just go ahead and immediately, you know, after weathering and panel line washes and whatever, immediately go over this with a flat coat, because I'm going to want to hide those raised edges of that decal film and blend in not only that difference in height, but also the difference in sheen before I go any further. So this is the point where I would go back to my video about hiding a decal film edge, and I would be spraying or maybe even brushing a pretty heavy application of Aqua Gloss just in the area over and around that decal, and then sanding it down and repeating that process until I had that edge blended in. And so I would know that when I came back over it with my flat coat, that you wouldn't even be able to see. Sometimes you don't have to do that, but obviously with these Tamiya decals being fairly thick, you have to. Okay. Now, the regular Mark Fit, that's sample number 2. It's kind of weird. It affected the paint a little bit more than this one did. It's kind of seemed like it would be the other way around, but again, the decal looks pretty good. Don't really see anything to complain about there. Not honestly a whole lot of difference. I would have expected it to be less successful, and actually, okay, it is. It's subtle, but if you look right there next to that V, you can see it is not completely melted into that panel line. So that's a strike against it. Over here on this sample, though, everything looks pretty good. You know, again, it hasn't really affected the clear coat very much. So that one's good. Okay, now this one's kind of surprising. Okay, this is the regular Mark Fit on Aqua Gloss, and you can see also not perfectly melted into the panel line. You can see a little bit of, tiny bit of silvering in that panel line. But look how much it affected the Aqua Gloss. That surprises me. I mean, that's a significant defect all the way around it there. Not a defect that I would count on disappearing under additional clear coats. I mean, that's actually pretty alarming and surprises me. I consider Aqua Gloss to be pretty bulletproof. Okay, next, let's look at the Guns Mr. Mark Softer. And I should also say at this point, I did a little bit of research before I used this, and it seems pretty clear that Mr. Mark Setter, again with the goofiness and backwardness of the names, that this is really just to make the decal have better adhesivity. Is that a word? Adhesiveness? I don't know. Anyway, sticks better, apparently, when you use Mr. Mark Setter, which to me again is backwards. But at least with Mr. Mark Softer, we're consistent in the idea that a setting solution is supposed to soften the decal and make it conform to the surface. So I only used this one, and I had to do a little bit of reading on different forums to get a consensus on that, because the instructions on the Guns website are just a little confusing. But at any rate, it looks pretty good. This is the paint only sample, and you can see it conformed the decal in there just like you'd want it to. It looks good. It even wrapped it around those bits of phlegm that are in that paint. But you can see it also did affect the paint some. Particularly, it seemed to create some little cracks in the AK paint. You can see there just above the tip of the 7 and right over there above the corner of the 8. So that's a bit disturbing, because most of that I would expect to go away with additional clear coats, but those little cracks, not so much. All right, now let's look at it on the sample of that's clear coated in Future. You can see there's definitely some disturbance to the clear coat there. You can see it above the 7, but overall not bad. It's melted it into the panel lines pretty well. Okay, now this one is really a bit alarming, because it screwed up the clear coat. Look at that. This is the sample that's on Aqua Gloss, and it jacked it up. I mean, that's ruined. You're done basically at that point. Rewind, go back to zero. Do not collect $200. That's pretty disappointing, because you'd be pissed at that point. Interesting that it did not do it over the MRP though, and you'll see that when we skip down to the to the next sample. All right, so going back to paint only, that is Solvaset, and as you can see, it has melted that decal into every little thing. I mean, there's even some scratches in the paint right there from the paint that was underneath that it melted that thing into. And it disturbed the AK a little bit there. You can see below the lower left corner of the 6, there's some kind of growth going on there. But you can see that's how strong Solvaset is. It just pounds that decal in there mercilessly. Okay, now here is Solvaset on top of Future. You can see, again, perfectly conformed, but also, some disturbance. You can see some kind of growth going on there to the left of the 6, and a little bit around the 7 there. Now, here we go. This is where it gets, again, with on top of Aqua Gloss. Again, look at that. It ruined the paint. But again, it's on top of the AK Real Color. You can see very clearly with both of those situations where the paint got ruined that it's only the AK Real Color. And I'm surprised by that on 2 levels, because I wouldn't have expected the Aqua Gloss to get as much of an effect, and I certainly wouldn't have expected it to just blow right through it and wrinkle the paint underneath, but clearly it did. And it's just interesting to me that it's only on top of the AK Real Color. Why did it not do the same thing to the MRP? I mean, the MRP is a straight up lacquer, and I spray it straight out of the bottle. The AK Real Color is a hybrid, kind of like Tamiya, where it should be acting as a lacquer when you reduce it with lacquer thinner, which I did. So I don't know, that's weird. I honestly not sure what to say about that. Okay, last sample. We already covered the AK decal adapter thing. So this last sample is microsol, and it did fine. It didn't seem to affect the paint at all. But if you look really closely, you can see some silvering in those grooves where it did not completely melt it down into the detail. And that's not too much of a surprise, because microsol is just not as strong as Solvaset, and it looks maybe not as strong as like the Tamiya stuff. Okay, here it is on top of the sample with Future, and it looks pretty good, but there's a big bubble in that panel line right there underneath the R. You can see it's just not fully conformed into those details. Unfortunately, this opposite wing piece doesn't have that exact same detail, but you still get the same thing. Almost perfect, but there is one bubble, see there on the 4, and a slight effect to the paint, maybe, I don't know. So interesting, interesting results, at least to me. I'm not sure, what hard conclusions I'm going to come to yet. I'll decide that before I make the conclusion, and I may tinker around a little bit more. These tests, I tend to, once I've done what I think I need to do, I tend to start just tinkering and doing random stuff. So I may come back with some different decals. I may just try some straight IPA as a setter, because all of these solutions are at least for the most part, seem to be very alcohol based. Mark Fit Strong and Solvaset to me smell a lot alike. This stuff, AK adapter, smells very much like an alcohol, but it's different. Microsol definitely smells alcohol like. I'm not sure what it is, but there's an alcohol component in there. The weird thing is that neither of these Guns solutions smelled like anything to speak of, so don't know what to say about them. But I think at this point I can pretty clearly say that this stuff loses. It's going in the trash, down the drain. I'll keep the bottle. It's a good bottle. Don't want to waste that. But I mean, look, the bottom line for me is it may work fine on other decals. In fact, Matt McDougall has tried it out, and he said it worked great on some decals. But for me, I don't see any point in keeping something around that doesn't work on the most possible things. And Solvaset works great on all decals that are not super thin, in my experience. I've made the mistake of trying it on some really thin Cartograph decals one day, and it was too strong. It screwed them up. And so I learned my lesson there, that at least with those, to start with Microsol. So between those two, I've got a solution that covers everything I've ever tried to do, except some really, really terrible Academy decals that actually wouldn't respond to anything weaker than Tamiya Extra Thin. So again, why am I going to keep this around if it won't handle a decal that is pretty common and that all of the others will handle relatively successfully? So it's no good to me. The Mark Fit regular, doesn't really seem to do that great of a job. It's okay, but it also had an effect over here. It's kind of weird to me that it did and the stronger stuff did not, but that's kind of a strike against it. The Mr. Mark Softer, it did okay, but again, it jacked up the clear coat right here. So it's got something in it that a clear coat I use all the time is not going to like. So it's a strike against it. It's probably going down the drain. But it seems pretty clear. I mean, if you just go in terms of successfully put the decal in place the way that we wanted it to 100% and caused basically no issues, well, on any of this stuff, then really the Tamiya Mark Fit Strong would be the clear winner in this competition. Go figure, something Tamiya does is the best. Well, of course, I could not resist tinkering. It makes these stupid videos longer, but sometimes I find that I learn the most interesting things when I just go off the script and, just do other things. So I did. I tinkered a little bit. I had read someplace recently on one of the Facebook groups, some guy said he uses X20A as his decal setting solution. And I was admittedly skeptical, but I thought, hey, I've got it right here. I'll just try some. And since it is alcohol, well, I thought I'd give it a whirl. Now, a lot of people think that this is nothing more than isopropyl alcohol. That's absolutely not correct. It's about 15% what's called normal propyl alcohol, which maybe that's the same as isopropyl. I'm not enough of a chemist to know. But then it's about another 20% butyl alcohol, and then there's a 10% of yet another type of butyl alcohol, and then like a few percentage points of some secret stuff, and then water. It is literally 54% water. And it did good. I was really surprised. It actually ends up being one of the best results in the test. And you can see that here. I also decided to tinker with some Hasegawa decals that I had. Figured, why not? But for apples to apples, this is on the Aqua Gloss sample, and that number 8 right there was applied with X20A, and I mean, it's perfect. You can't get any better than that. But okay, look carefully. Do you see the discoloration around it? There's a halo where it's turned slightly lighter green. So, thought that was interesting. I thought, well, let's see if it does that on future. And it does. Okay, that's another Hasegawa decal. You can see it is settled in there perfectly with the X20A, but see that? There is an effect all the way around it. Maybe not quite as noticeable, but it's definitely there. It's doing something to that future that changes the way it looks. So I thought, well, so what happens on straight paint? And got this result. And you can see this one is not quite as perfect. I've got a few little bubbles, which is not a big deal, not too abnormal, with a decal that size, but still not quite as good. Over here, that is another one of the Tamiya decals that I applied with the X20A, and you can see it did a great job and did not affect the MRP. And then the important thing about this little blue sample here is that straight on the AKRC also did not affect the paint. So, take your pick. Maybe you get a slightly better result with the clear coat in that example, but you also get some issues. And now where you really see issues, I thought, what the heck? I'll try some straight IPA. It's alcohol, obviously. And I keep like 90% or 99% IPA for, cleaning stuff. And not only did it not do a very good job as a setter, I mean, you can see quite a bit of silvering underneath that, but things got out of hand in a hurry, like immediately, because MRP has no resistance whatsoever to isopropyl alcohol. So that's definitely not something I would recommend, but you know, you can draw your own conclusions from all of the other stuff that I've done here. Okay, so I was all set to edit this video, and of course, in usual Rube Goldberg fashion, I felt like there was an addendum worth addenduming. So since I'm gonna dunk all these in brake fluid pretty soon and strip all this off of here, I just decided, what the hell, I'm gonna hose them down with some dull coat and see, you know, just see. So when I say hose down, I mean literally hose down. I use this for when I want a quick shot of ungloss and I don't want to worry about cleaning an airbrush, but it does go on heavily. And as seems to be the case with most clear coats that come in a rattle can, it's pretty hot. Well, I say most, I shouldn't use terms like that, but you know, the Tamiya TS sprays, some of the others, they seem to be really hot. And when you see dudes having trouble with them, it's because they are hot and they come out in a flood, and yep, you get issues like this. Yep, that's what happens when you put too much hot lacquer on top of all-clad aqua gloss. And you know, it's strictly about volume and heat, because I put dull coat thinned with cheapo hardware store lacquer thinner directly on aqua gloss on the regular. But I'm doing it in a controlled fashion. I'm not hosing it down like I did with this, and so I don't run into that crackling effect. But it's interesting. You can see how much the decal film protected what's underneath it, and this kind of drives home the point, I feel, again, that more issues with a clear coat than without, because here's the future sample, and yay, it didn't crackle, but look, you can still see all of those effects of the setting solutions. And you're still not hiding that film, you know, so again, you really didn't help yourself a whole lot. Then you compare that to this sample where the decals were put straight on the paint and then hosed with dull coat. And yeah, you can still see the film. That's going to happen, you know, but no big dramas. Now, as far as that film goes, this also drives home the point that if you are going to do a clear coat before your decals, and again, I still don't think that's something that's worth doing in most cases. But if you're going to do it, the thing that you put on next after the decal had better be the same clear coat that's under the decals, because what you want to do is sandwich those things in between those layers of whatever that clear is, so that hopefully you don't get any weird effects of the clear coat on whatever the material surrounding your decal is, because that can happen sometimes. Or really, I think what it is it's less about having an effect on the surrounding material than it is about just not affecting the decal film in the same way. And that's a good example of it right there. I mean, basically what you have to take into consideration is that the surface texture of the paint is one thing. The surface texture of the decal film is another thing, and probably a smoother thing, because it's basically a few more layers of clear paint that you've put on top of whatever's underneath there. So it's going to be slightly smoother, and it is going to have a different level of reflectivity, whatever, than the surrounding paint. And as I've shown in the video I did about hiding decal film, and this is the sample piece from that, if you want to hide that decal film, you've got to account for two things. One is the differences in how the film or the paint around it reacts, and that's where having a non-reactive clear coat on top at a minimum is important. But also you've got to account for the height difference between the decal film and the surrounding surface, which I did in this test. The second thing, but not so much the first thing, because for whatever reason, the decal film was showing a different shade. I think in this case that happened because I did some oil work on top of these after I put the decals on, but before applying the dull coat. And the fact is, these decals in this test were put on top of aqua gloss. So the whole, you got to have gloss underneath it in order to prevent that sort of color shift. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily hold true either. Basically, again, I'm just sticking to what I've said for a long time, which is not only does the clear coat under the decals not provably do anything in your favor, but as you can see here, it may in fact cause you some issues that are definitely not in your favor. Now, having said all of that, whenever people start spouting generalities about decals, don't believe them. Even me. What you should do is test it for yourself, because the bottom line is that there's an infinite number of combinations of decals, paint, and setting solutions. And you can get a whole bunch of different effects as a result. And a perfect illustration was one of the guys in Scale Modeler's critique group was commenting on some stuff that I had posted about this test, and he said, yeah, I used some IPA to settle some decals down on this Airfix kit, and because nothing else would work, and they turned out beautiful. And he showed a picture of it. They looked awesome, and I was like, yeah, well, there you go. When I did the little test, the IPA sample, not only did the IPA not do anything, good for the decal to speak of, but, it screwed up the surrounding paint. And he said, yeah, I was really careful where I applied it, and the clear coat that I was working on top of was X22. X22 is different. It's an acrylic in name only. It is not an acrylic in the same way that either Aqua Gloss or Future are. They're both acrylics. They're not the same as each other. We all know that acrylics, in quotes, have lots of different actual formulations. So the point being is that that guy had a specific set of variables with his paint, his clear coat, his decals, and his setting solution that were different than anything I've shown here, and he had different results. So the bottom line is, if you're really worried about it, the only way to guarantee that you're going to be successful is to take a decal off the sheet you're going to use that you don't need, and do a test using all of the materials that you're going to have on your finished model. That's basically it. Okay, so there you go. I hope you guys found that bit of nonsense useful and informative. I did. I learned, honestly, more than I expected to. I was prepared for there to be no differences in any of them and for it to be, just basically anticlimactic. But I think there are a couple of things that I can say that I'm pretty convinced of at this point. Unfortunately, one of them is that I would not recommend the AK decal adapter. I don't know. This stuff just didn't do anything to speak of on a couple of these decals. And when I made the comment to Matt McDougall to that effect, he said, yeah, it seemed like on some of the decals I tried it on, it worked really well, and on others, it did nothing at all. So for me, that's a total fail. I just don't have any tolerance for products that work some or most of the time, especially when there are alternatives that clearly work like they're supposed to virtually all the time. I mean, no product is perfect. You can always find exceptions, but yeah, so that's no good. Not a big fan of the Mr. Mark Softer. Didn't feel like it really did much, and it was one of the things that affected the clear coat that I normally use, which is Aqua Gloss. But then again, so did Solvaset, which I've always been using. The truth is, I just rarely do decals, almost never do decals on top of a clear coat, and this is kind of another another example of why. In general, the way these results turned out, there were more issues with the samples that had an acrylic clear coat on them. Had it been a clear coat like X22, maybe it would have been different. Had it been a lacquer clear coat like Gloss Coat, or any one of or GX100, for example, I don't know that the issues would have been the same. I don't know. I don't tend to use lacquer gloss clear for anything to speak of. So I don't know that it would have been any different. But the bottom line is that these two acrylic clear coats are very common, and lots of people insist that you have to use one before you do your decals. And I've always argued that you don't, that that's an old wives' tale. And I think this, again, is another little bit of evidence that shows why. Because the fact is, when you look at these samples, most of the issues in the results happened on the ones with an acrylic clear on them. I mean, it's right there. It's undeniable. If you watched the video, you saw it. The best results were, or the most consistent results anyway, were on this sample that had no clear coat on it at all, where I decaled straight on the paint. So again, that just convinces me even further that that's the best strategy. Because again, there are people who want to use a clear coat as a barrier coat to protect the paint, and they're not even hung up on the idea that it somehow makes the decals go on easier or with less chance of silvering. They're just thinking of the clear coat as a safety, and it wasn't in this case. So again, there you go. Now, if you consider this thing sort of a shootout of these products, again, you can't deny that the winner would have to be the Tamiya Mark Fit Strong. I mean, again, the results are undeniable. If you look at it in terms of how well the solution smashed the decal down into the surface that it was going on, it was equivalent to several of the others, like Solvaset, for example, but it had zero issues with affecting the surface, and Solvaset did not. I mean, it's right there. Solvaset had an effect in 2 out of 3 cases. The Mark Fit Strong had no effect on any of them. It was perfect. So again, there you go. Tamiya. And I know you might say, well, yeah, of course, it's Tamiya decals and Tamiya setting solution. And I'm not saying that that's wrong to call that out, but I also did it with the Hasegawa decals, and it worked great there as well. So, yeah, good stuff. And my bottle of Solvaset is just about empty, and I don't think I'll replace it. I think I'll just use this Mark Fit Strong for the rare occasions when I need a decal setting solution. And I know that this is probably good news for some of you guys who live in places other than the United States, because Solvaset seems to be very difficult to get anywhere else. So, hey, I would say I would have no problem recommending Mark Fit Strong as an alternative, possibly even as a superior solution. So, anyway, there you go. That's what I did. That's what I think, and I hope that it was useful. So, anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys watching. Much love.